Seated tonight are myself, David Rathman, Gardner Young, Ben Philbrook, Fred Dykeman, and Lynn Conway. Also present are two alternates, Chuck Sheehan and Ryan Deasy.
We've got three. We've got
Is
Peter.
Peter on too?
Yes.
And
Yep. Peter's on.
Everyone's on. We have a full commission tonight. Minutes for the December 19th meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
Is there any discussion? A second. I hear a second.
Second.
Any discussion?
They look good.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Keith? We'll go to item 4B at the end of the meeting rather than the beginning.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So item 4D, the administrative review items. 4D1, PZ 2006 SD and GPP, D6 Realty LLC, Arthur Hayward. Request second 90-day extension to file final plans for a previously approved subdivision. Property located at 3 Country Lane, Pawcatuck. Assessors map 21, block 1, lot 3, zone RA20. This is the second request for a 90-day extension to file the final plans. They're just working on some of the legal documents and polishing up those final things in the plan.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Next.
All right, next is item 4D2, 21006 ZON, Lockwood, Coveside Marina, Thomas Lockwood. Request for interpretation of claim of pre-existing campsites on parcel. Property located at 830 Stonington Road, Stonington. Assessors map 57, block 2, lot 11, zone MC80. Let's see. So this is a zoning permit that's been submitted basically as a request to legitimize a possible legal non-conforming status of a campground at the Coveside Marina. So the zoning official has referred this application to the commission for review. The basic question is, does this property have the right to operate campsites there as a legal non-conforming use? This is in the MC80 Marine Commercial District. So marina activities are allowed. However, campsites and campgrounds are not permitted in the district, and they're not considered an accessory use to a marina in the zoning regulations. The applicant's opinion is that the property has legal non-conforming status to do this. He says that the campground has existed prior to the adoption of zoning in 1961, and it's grandfathered in basically to do that activity. And if the campground does predate zoning, statutes say that the passage of time alone can't extinguish that right to the property. And Mr. Lockwood's here tonight to speak more about that. But it is the department's opinion is that the campground is not a legally non-conforming use on the property. The zoning official included a memo here that had a lot of older correspondence and documentation showing that the operation of the campground was an ongoing enforcement issue back since the late 70s. This was the determination of the ZEO, the commission, and the town attorney back then. There's a 1978 letter from the previous owner that says the campground was there for the past 7 years, which will only bring it back to 1971. It seems like the marina was only really there since 1968 from what we can gather. So it seems like the campground was never legal to begin with from the documentation we have. It was started by the previous owner after the adoption of zoning already prohibited the activity, and the town took enforcement action to stop it. But Mr. Lockwood's here, so the commission should hear his take on it. And
Mr. Lockwood,
Yes.
you're on.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, first off, what I wanted to address was a couple things. One, I wanted to thank Keith for sending me the report that was done basically on that Route 1 corridor to explain what would be best for the town, what most of the townspeople wanted. And in reviewing that report, the basic gist of it is the town doesn't really want change. For the most part, in that area, they'd like to see things stay relatively normal. Nobody really wants a 400-unit low-income subdivision put in there or other things of that nature. And in reviewing that report, I felt like there should have been one more page added to the end of it that said, Tom Lockwood is the perfect owner for that property. Because I agree with everything in there. I really do. I'm a big proponent of open land. I'm a big proponent of environmental friendliness. I own 6 marinas, 2 of them here in Stonington. And I am a big environmentalist. I work excellent with the DEEP in Connecticut and the CRMC in Rhode Island. I've had very excellent repertoire with them over the past several years. Give you an example. I was the first marina labeled as a completely green marina in Rhode Island. This was 15 years ago, much prior to all of the awareness that is around now. Thank God it's here. But I started that quite early. Give you an example in Stonington, just with this property alone at 830, the Cove Side Marina, we've done a lot of work there. We've gotten a lot of people from the town that have just driven by and stopped and said what a great job we're doing, how happy everyone is that they can see water now from Route 1 again. All of the neighbors that I had to send out cards to for the meeting, they all responded to me. All 7 of them responded to me and said, is there anything we can do? Can we write letters? What can we do? You're doing a great job. We're very, so happy that you purchased the property and, doing as much work as you have. And to give you a specific example, at the Stonington property, part of the marina is the bulkhead, which is the area that directly basically attaches to the water. And it needed a lot of work. And I went over this with DEEP and we talked about it. And basically there was a few ways to do it. One of which would have been the easiest and the most cost effective would have been to simply purchase big ledge rocks, bring them in and stack them on top of another, and you have your bulkhead. But the problem with that, in my eyes, is that now you're introducing a new rock into the environment. And Whittier-Quack Cove is a very unique ecosystem, and it needs to be monitored very closely because there's not a ton of water. There's a small bridge, small entryway into the cove. So you need to be very careful. What I did instead was I pulled all the rocks out of the water that had fallen down from that bulkhead over time. I ended up spending close to $300,000 instead of spending $100,000. So I spent significantly more money, but I didn't introduce anything into the area. So I saved the environment a lot of grief and aggravation, and I would continue to do that going forward. I always try to maintain so that it is indigenous to the area. And if we all do that, and everyone in general realizes that, we'll make an environmental positive impact. And that's the number one thing that, I'm concerned about at that property, maintaining that. Now, that brings me to item 2, which says the property is in the MC zone, Marine Commercial Zoning District. Marina activities are allowed. However, campsite campgrounds are not permitted in that district and not considered an accessory use to the marina and zoning regulations. And that's where I disagree with that. I mean, these regulations are written as a whole, as a group. So that same regulation for marina is supposed to monitor me as the same as monitoring Mystic River Marina, Safe Harbor, Brewer's Boatyard, all of the extremely large marinas, even my other marina, Mystic Point Marina. They shouldn't all be the same because there's a huge difference between all of those large marinas and Coveside Marina. And the difference is the train bridge. I can only get small boats in my marina. You can't have more than a 54-inch from water line to top to get through under the train bridge. So it limits me. I'm limited. I'm handcuffed as to what boats I can put in there. They have to be all small boats. So many of you, I'm sure, are fishermen, no fishermen. I mean, if you are a fisherman, you would know that when you're going to fish striped bass, for example, you're getting out there early in the morning. I mean, these guys want to be out there for first light. So what's the major difference between the two? They can't sleep on their boat. I have all small boats. These people don't have the ability to sleep on their boat like somebody at Mystic River Marina does, where you can stay on your boat, crash in your car, sleep over, and get up there and get out there first light. So that really is for interpretation. And I would hope that this board would be able to look at that and say, hey, you know what? He's right. There is a difference between those boats, those Boston whalers, and all of the larger boats at a lot of the other marinas. So maybe this rule should be tweaked a little bit, and that's what you guys have the ability to do. And that's really what I'm looking for. What I want to do is try to keep this property the way it has always been. And it has been a campsite for a long time. Whether it's prior to 1961 or not, I don't know that answer. I'm trying to figure that out right now. I have some people that are putting affidavits together, and I'm trying to get to the bottom of it. But with COVID and everything else, it's challenging. But I'm trying very hard to get to that. Now, based on some of the aerial photos that we have, we know that there was a campsite there in the 1970s. We all know that. And the zoning department is not disagreeing with me on that. The question is not really to prove if there was a campsite there prior to early 70s, because that's already been established. So what I'm really trying to do is say, okay, a couple things. One, was it there 10 years earlier? And am I really going out on a limb by saying that it was there? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But more importantly, I'm also trying to see if this commission will be able to look at that and at least understand what I'm saying and make that decision to say, yeah, we want people that have small boats to be able to enjoy Whittiaqua Cove and be able to enjoy Stonington in their interest and be able to stay in a small camper or stay in their van if that's the case. There's plenty of guys that want to just plug in their van and stay a night and then go out fishing the next morning. So I don't feel like that is asking for something that is not truly an accessory use. I do believe it to be an accessory use. And the reason the campsites have been there for the last 50 years, comfortably 50 years, maybe not exactly 61 as it needs to be per se, I don't know that. But in all intents and purposes, for the last 50 years, they have been there. And the reason they have been there is because people need them. And a lot of the paperwork between the previous owner, Mr. Watsky, and the town going back and forth, They talk about that. And he mentions the fact that a lot of those boaters were using these campsites for that particular reason. And he was correct, and it's always been like that. So when I look at this and I say, what's best for the town? After looking at the report that Keith provided and saying, yeah, the town really wants to keep it the same. Well, the same really does include keeping it those few campsites right there and allowing people to basically utilize that cove, be able to enjoy Stonington, enjoy the sound like we would all hope. And everybody doesn't have the money, I'll say, in the finances to be able to live in the borough in a beautiful home right on the water and enjoy that. Everyone doesn't have that. I mean, it's great for the people that do, and that's fantastic. But for some of them that don't, it's nice to be able to have this spot that's protected, that people can rent the boat slip. They can be able to stay that night and be able to go fishing the next day. And it's been that way for a long time. And I think the residents of Stonington, they want that. I mean, like I said, I have 2 marinas here in Stonington. I house about 500 different people. Between the ones I have in Groton Long Point and the one I have in Watch Hill, there's still a lot of Stonington residents that, for one reason or another, elect to keep their boat, let's say in Watch Hill. They like the fishing better, or in Groton Long Point because they have friends there. So all in all, there may be 600 or 700 different Stonington residents that all keep their boats with me. And I try to speak with everyone and figure out what everybody wants. And it's all pretty much been the same. And
Thank you.
I think that's where it stands.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any of the commission members have any questions at this time?
How big is the campground? That property looks to be, I don't know, 8-10 acres. How much of it is taken up by campground?
But currently the property is over 12 acres.
12 acres.
Yep. And I'm not looking to bombard it with campers at all. It could easily hold hundreds of campers. But I think the proper number is between 25 and 50, which is pretty much it's always been. Based on the photos, there's always been about 25 to 50 campsites there. And it doesn't take up that much room at all. There is ample acreage for additional parking and anything else that would ever be needed. Plenty of room for horseshoes and things like that.
So is it fair? What's the plan for the rest of the property?
I'd like to keep the property just the way it is. I do not want to develop it. I'm a big proponent of open space, open land, and mostly just keeping it where kids, the next generations, would be able to enjoy the water, enjoy fishing and crabbing and all the great things that I did as a kid in Stonington. I'd love to see that. So I do not want to develop it. My plan is to keep it just the way it has always been. That's exactly what I'd like to do.
Ben?
Thank you, Mr. Lockwood. I'm a little confused in that I read all the documentation provided by Keith's staff. It seems to me that Watsky and Jeffries never came to an agreement, ever. And it was illegal back then. And then it spilled over 12 years later into Wayne Green's employment, and he also had to shut it down because it wasn't legal. So I'm not sure we're in a position to legally bless this. I think we'd have to go through a zone change.
Well, I think that just because Mr. Watsky previously was speaking back to 1971, for example, that doesn't mean that it wasn't there prior in 60s. And my goal is to find out. I'm actually thinking about putting up a large sign at the top of my property offering a reward for any information on this property prior to 1960. And as people come with a picture, I'd like to just get something that would just make it easy where I can keep this property the way it is, not change it at all, and do what's best for the town and what's best for the people that really want to use the water and the campsites in the way it was meant to be used, and not change anything.
Lynn? Lynn, do you have any questions? I can't hear Lynn.
Any questions?
Okay. Gardner?
I'm okay at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, a few comments here. The MC80 zone, it doesn't allow camping, overnight accommodations, or anything like that as an accessory use. The definition of marina talks about some, activities allowed in a marina, and these things aren't listed as one of them. We are talking about whether this is a legal non-conforming activity. So whether it predates zoning sort of has to be the issue, and whether there's evidence to support that. Maybe it's a broader question whether marinas should be allowed to have this, but that would take a regulation amendment to change the rules in the MC80 zone for all marinas.
Any other questions at this time? Do I hear a motion on this application?
I will, for purposes of furthering the discussion, I will make a motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
I second it.
Discussion?
As I mentioned, I think this has been illegal ever since Watsky owned it, and he couldn't find out anything before his ownership on the property. So I agree with Keith that it would, need a zone change for all MC80 properties and go that route. So with this specific question in front of us, I would say no, I deny it.
I would have to agree with that. There's no evidence that it was a legal. I don't think it was a pre-existing non-conforming use. So I think our hands are tied on this.
Lynn? Lynn. Is Lynn muted?
Yes, she is.
Lynn, you're muted. Well, Lynn, you're muted.
I know I'm having my button there. So, although I think Mr. Lockwood had some very, very good points, I think it's kind of down. I think we're very limited in what we do here with this particular application, but I certainly do think it's food for thought, and as we go through the zoning regs, it's probably like something we want to consider based on location of the various marinas, and to put some type of allowance in. But at this point, I just don't see how we can. I think we're in what we can do.
This is Ben. Excuse me, Lynn. I caught about a third of what you were trying to say. Are you basically for or against the application?
I'm against the application, although I think Mr. Lockwood has some very good points.
Right.
That we're kind of tied here to the current regulation.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Gardner, you have any discussion on it?
I'm just thinking it's going to be seasonal, which means it ain't going to be all the time. And also, um, it's better than putting up a motel. It's 12 acres. Put up a 100-unit motel there. So I'm sort of, I don't think it's a
It's
great
not in our,
idea, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
it's not in our regulations. That's,
Okay. Yeah, I get that. I get that.
and in pre-existing, I remember when the Rifles owned the property. I think it was Max Rifle's mother. She could have gone by a different name. At that time, this was in the 60s. I was in the insurance business at that time. We insured it. The only thing I remember there is that some cottages for rent. They did have cottages they rent, Mr. Lockwood. There was 2 or 3 cottages that were seasonal, but there were no campers there, and there were I don't even know if the motel was built. That wasn't built in the 60s. It was built later on. But basically, it was a house and a few guest house and a few cottages. That's my recollection. That's just my opinion on it.
Well, if I may speak, I think you are correct, sir. Because based on the information that I've uncovered from other people, I'm waiting on 2 affidavits. I have 2 people that said exactly what you said, that there were 4 cottages on the, 4 smaller cottages on the property that they rented.
Yes.
They also said that they did have mobile campers, a handful of them,
I don't remember that
at
at
those
all.
cottages as well. And that
I don't remember that at all.
early, but that's just what they had said. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of it all now.
I don't even know if we had campers back in the 60s. I don't remember that.
Showing your age, David.
What? I know. Sorry about that. So do I hear a motion on this? On all those in favor of this application? All those opposed?
Aye.
Opposed.
Opposed. Deny. Application denied. Thank you. Look forward to working for you and other things we can help you.
Thank you very much for taking the time. You've all been, thank you for listening. And at the end of the day, I do just want to make that property the way it was and keep it open for the town. I think that's in the best interest of the town, and that's what I'm going to try to strive to accomplish. So I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith.
Yeah, item 4D4 PZ 2013 SD and GPP Jane L. Howard. I'm sorry, I'm skipping 3. 5D4 2113 ZON Annette and Gary Vaca, Anthony Netta. Zoning permit application for removal and subsequent mitigation of invasive species in the non-infringement area. Property located at 14 Oak Street, Stonington, Assessors Map 129, Block 2, Lot 1, and Map 129, Block 1, Lots 1 and B, Zone RC 120. These properties here are located in the RC 120 residential coastal zone. That zone has a 100-foot non-infringement area from tidal wetlands. Basically, in the non-infringement area, you can't develop the property, you can't really do anything except for certain things with the commission's approval. One of those are for public trails, greenways, boat access, or water quality restoration activities. What the applicants are looking to do is to remove the invasive species along the coast, including Phragmites, oriental bittersweet, and poison ivy, plant native vegetation there to restore the area, an invasive species management and remediation planting plan was submitted by an ecological management consultant that details these activities. Some of the activities proposed, like removal of shells and phragmites below the coastal jurisdiction line, will need DEP's approval in a form of a permit from them. So if this is approved tonight, recommended stipulation is that state approval shall be obtained prior to any ground disturbance. There was a plan submitted by Mr. Nenna, the engineer on the project. Mr. Nenna is here in addition to the property owners, and I believe the ecological consultant too, if there's any questions on this. And the plan shows just where they propose on doing these activities.
Who wants to go on first? Mr. Nema?
I'll ask a question if no one wants to do a presentation.
Sure.
I'm just curious about the herbicide. What is it? Garland 3A. And I just did a thumbnail sketch on it. Could somebody tell me more about that and how inert it is in the ground?
Hi, I can take care of that.
Great.
So the Garland 3A is a triclopyr. It is an aquatic approved herbicide. What we'll be doing is applying it with an invert emulsion. So we actually apply super, super low volume. It'll be a foliar application to any plants that grow back. We did intend on, in the dune area where the Rose rugosa is doing a mowing and planting first to stabilize the dune, and then spot sprays with the triclopyr. So it is foliar, it gets absorbed through the plant, it remains in the plant system, kills down through the roots. So very low impact, very low volume application to the area.
So it differs from Roundup. It doesn't go into the groundwater and remain that way. You're saying it just stays on the plant.
It'll absorb into the plant, and we do very selective spot sprays as well, where we just target the plant. We use handheld backpack sprayers, so nothing broadcast, nothing that's going to be covering the whole area, just very selective to the plant.
And you do that after the mowing?
Traditionally, we do beforehand. For the Phragmites, we would like to do beforehand, but for this area, we plan to mow the rose and the poison ivy and the bittersweet that are on the dunes first. And then do the planting for stabilization purposes, and then be doing the triclopyr applications. It is a selective herbicide, so it won't harm the grasses that we're going to be planting. It'll just selectively target the woody species.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question if I can.
Sure.
Is there any expected, I'm sorry, this is Chuck Shan. Is there any expected reemergence of the invasive species after the treatment that you've just described is 100% complete? And if so, how would you have to come back to us again or go back to deep, or is the permit granted with the idea in mind that the reemergence could be treated in a particular manner?
So I guess I can kind of address a little of that there. So typically and I have actually outlined about 3 years of management for this site. So the very first year will be the most aggressive year. You're going to have the largest amount of biomass. But as the years go on, we have less vegetation, less presence, and we move more to a rapid response monitoring program. So after the 3 years of recommended management, if there is a reemergence, especially of the Phragmites, that's a very aggressive invasive species to the coast, we can do monitoring as we go. When we get our DEP permits, you can get them a year's worth. They only selectively grant 3-year permits. We have done those as well. But as we go, as a permit expires, we go to DEP, they approve it. So the process continues each year as a permit expires or reaches its end date.
So the duration of the permit is 3 years.
The longest one that they give out is 3 years, yes.
What have you applied for?
We haven't put in the permit yet. We were waiting to see the results of tonight's meeting. But we put in the permit. It usually takes anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. We do have to do an NDDB check of any sensitive species in the area. So NDDB application, the Connecticut pesticide application, permit from DEP. And we wouldn't be looking to start any sort of the herbicide work until early summer, late spring.
Aren't we getting the cart ahead of the horse?
No, I mean the permitting process. We can start and submit the application in as soon as possible. They typically grant them for these sites as long as you show the proper steps beforehand.
There has been a history of removal of sand on the beach and things. Any removal of sand? What's bringing in sand? Is any of that going to happen?
No, we're going to be using the existing dunes that are there. We just want to establish the planting to preserve the dune from any kind of erosion effects.
And how about the pipe? Is there a pipe in the property?
There is not a pipe. It's further to the north. There's a pipe that connects the sound to the wetland in the back. It's not anywhere near our site.
It's not anywhere near your site. Okay.
It's probably maybe 100 or so yards away.
Is it flowing? Is it blocked or is it working?
As far as I know, it works. I know there was. It's what brings the salt water into the marsh. But I believe that during last winter there was the pipe was lifted out of the ground, but I think the state had came and fixed that. But as far as I know, right now it works.
I can confirm that the pipe does work. I'm the homeowner at 29 Lindbergh.
Okay.
So this is Lynn Conway. So what happens if your plan does not work? Then do you have an alternate plan and you would come back to the commission to get approval for that plan? I mean, hopefully it would work, but what if it didn't? Would you need to come back and make a proposal on how to treat the invasive species?
Based off of our experience, we've had good success with the chosen herbicides that we'd be using in this site, and these methods. We've been doing it for a long time, and we know that these chemicals would be effective against treating the invasive species here. It is a long process. It is an ongoing process. The definition of an invasive species is a species that is not native to the area, and it does have persistent problems associated with it in terms of, giving competition to the native species. So that's why our goal is to encourage and introduce native species to the area that'll help keep all the invasives at bay and keep them from becoming more of a nuisance in the area.
So are you considering this to be a 3-year project, or is your thought that no, this will be 5 years, this will be 6 years? What is your?
It's the ideally we would like to have good management and control of the area against the invasive species in a 3-year plan. I really can't speak to if it would take 5 years or 6 years. It all depends on any residual seed source in the soil. Seed can be introduced via birds, via the wind. It's the coastal area. The Phragmites has a very aggressive seed bank. So it's really, it would really depend on how the area reacts to invasives reintroducing. And if that is the case, we do like to move, like I said, to an early detection plan. If anything is noticed, we can do monitor treatments, which are more maintenance, very, very small, like I said, low impact, very small, very selective, to encourage the natives to really flourish in the area and hopefully reduce the need for our services there.
When do you plan to start this?
The invasive work, we planned on starting doing the mowing just about any point as soon as we can. The planting about March is the ideal time for a lot of these species to be planted to take off. The invasive work, we would be doing 2 applications throughout the season, one in early summer, late spring, and another come late summer. It addresses all growing points of the plants, and it would be followed by mowing again, especially to the Phragmites. We could do more pruning and trimming on the dune area where we've done the planting, where everything will be far more selective.
So does a program of this sort require ongoing maintenance, even if your initial 3-year period is successful? You expect a perpetual maintenance issue with this kind of a program?
It may, like I mentioned earlier, the invasive species are very persistent and very aggressive, especially the Phragmites. So it may very well need maintenance as we go, a 4th year or 5th year after. It's really dependent on what does grow after we do our 3 years of maintenance.
Have you applied to DEP?
Not yet for this property, no. We have started the application process. We have to start with the NDDB, with the Natural Diversity Database, and then we can submit the application.
So you couldn't start without DEP's approval, correct?
We couldn't do the pesticide work. We can start with the mowing and planting.
So I guess this is my question, and I understand great confidence in your plans. So sorry if I continually ask the same question, but I'm going to put it a different way. If for whatever reason you had to change the chemical because it wasn't working, would you need to come back to this commission? I assume you would have to go back to the DEP, but would you need to come back to this commission as well before you went to the DEP?
Right.
And I don't know if that's a question you have the answer to, Desiree or Keith. I'm not.
As far
normally,
as yep, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Normally, if someone asked me that, I would say it wouldn't have to go back to the commission if they're using a different brand of pesticide. If it's something the commission feels is important, I guess you can request that. But normally, I don't know if you'd get into that level of detail.
Yep, and on our end for the DEP permit, we are only allowed to use what the DEP approves. So if we did change a chemical, we would have to submit a new permit.
Okay. Keith, you have here a recommendation that state approval shall be attained prior to any ground disturbance. Does that mean digging up things and planting things?
Yeah, that was my intention.
Okay.
Especially I was thinking of like the removal of the shells on the beach and replacing that.
That
But I
should
think ground
also,
disturbance is a good broad term.
but shouldn't that also include any chemical application? I mean, in other words, this program anticipates the use of certain chemicals, if you will, to accomplish its purpose, and so I would think any caveats attached to the approval of this would include not only ground disturbance but also the use of the of the chemicals.
Yeah, and I think that'd be a good idea since it's what was said tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Lynn. So I'm going to just harp on that for a moment. Uh, I, although I'm certain Desiree has complete confidence in the chemical that she's talked about, the way it works, etc., seems very benign and certainly the way to go. But I would like to see, if we were to move forward with this, not only that, it's based on DEP saying it's okay to use this particular chemical, but if the plan needs to change and another chemical is used, that you have to come back to this commission. I mean, if you think about it, what we focused on is how does this work? And I'm sure that there are other chemicals on the DEP list that work in a different way that maybe are used as a last resort, but they're still on the list. And I'd like to think that before that type of a change was made, you'd have to come back to the commission and explain how that particular chemical worked, even if it's a very brief explanation.
So would it make sense then to say something like any need to return to DEEP would also require return to planning and zoning, whether it's chemicals or time frame or whatever it is. If this program changes in any substantive way, then we need to hear about it. Would that work for you?
Yeah,
I think if we, oh, so I just wanted to introduce my 2 cents. So as far as the DEP approvals, there, from what I understand, we as long as we're not in the above the or below the 2 foot contour, we can go in and without a permit. And I think that's what Desiree was saying, to plant to remove the invasives and plant. So I think whether we go back to DEP because we're changing a chemical, I don't know if that really warrants going back to the town. Certainly, I think if we drastically change either the planting plan, or have to expand the planting plan, I think that's fair enough to go back. But just to if a chemical changes and it's on the approved DEP list and we're applying DEP when we change the chemical, I think that, in my opinion, that would be sufficient. But
This is Ben. I have 2 points. One, I think the DEEP knows a lot more about chemicals than we do.
I was going to say the exact same
And
thing.
so if they approve it and they allow that permit process to go through, I think I can live by that. But my other major point, however, is I think, Fred, what you're saying is these people can't mow until they get their DEP permit. However, that's going to bring you, I think, in the nesting season, you probably want to mow your Phragmites before nesting season. So I would say they can go ahead and do the mowing anytime.
Who in the hell would nest in Phragmites?
All sorts of invasive species.
I think the fact they're getting rid of the Phragmites is grounds enough to approve it to begin with. I mean,
Yes.
Phragmites is awful. And I agree with you that what the hell do we know about chemicals? I mean, if DEP says it's okay, if it's good enough for DEP, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
They have known to
enter into this conversation?
Do I hear a motion on this then?
Can the public enter into this conversation?
Keith?
David?
Well,
David,
Yes.
the point's been raised that we need
Hello?
public comment before we go anywhere with this.
I hear that. I hear that. Keith, can we have public comment?
Well, I mean, it's not a public
Not a
hearing.
public-
I mean, it's here, but isn't a
Happy to
public
have 'em.
hearing.
I'm happy to let the public talk. Everyone else?
Yep, that sounds good to me.
Okay. Yes, go right ahead.
My name's Bob Hollis. I live here at Lord's Point. I spend quite a bit of time over on that beach, and I do quite a bit of clamming right out in front of that beach. And the talk of all these chemicals scare the ever beat Jesus out of me about dumping something on a plant that maybe it'll go into whether it'll go into the soil and leach into to the sound there and do something to one of the few clamming areas we still have available to us, and that scares me quite a bit. The other thing that I'd like to mention is that property abuts Oak Street, Wards Point Paper Road, which has a tendency to flood, particularly high tides, storms, and so forth. Today, I think that you'd see that part of that road was flooded. What happens when we strip all of this vegetation, this invasive vegetation, off of that area? What happens between then or now and the time the new vegetation matures enough that it's going to hold that berm back, from which really holds back, high tides? That's right there, and all the water that could possibly breach that dune goes onto Maple or Oak Street, where the residents live. I think I don't see anything in these plans as to drainage and so forth. I think that there's a swale on the west side of the road there that eventually goes down the Phragmites and goes back over into the tidal pond. There's no mention of how is that going to be affected. These are some questions that, as a resident, I bring up. And I think that when we talk about birds and nesting, there's a section of probably 1,000 feet or a few feet of land there that's open and has vegetation for nesting and ospreys I see over there and things like that. Certainly would be affected by the stripping of this land. Just a few points that I'd like to bring up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I bring up? Could I address some of those, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go right ahead.
So we're not taking any flood storage away from the site. The runoff runs it does run on the west side of Oak Street, but I believe it just runs straight through and it eventually just dumps into the Sound. I think there's in that thick Phragmite, I think there's a little berm that separates the road from that Phragmite area. But we're not removing any flood storage. We're just simply removing the vegetation. The idea when we do remove the Phragmite is that the other plants, the native grasses, and Desiree can correct me if I'm wrong, but those grasses will start to take over where the Phragmites were. So this process takes time to reestablish. We're replanting the dune in I think in the spring summer season. We're gonna have that first planting that'll hopefully have time enough to establish and prevent any erosion that might occur. But in the plan, we need to be cognizant of that and make sure that we put up our silt funds maybe at the winter season when we're going to have heavy winds and storm surges to protect that dune that we planted. We spent all this money planting. So
you're not going to mow this dune.
No. Well, I believe they're going to mow the poison ivy and the Rosa rugosa. If I'm Desiree, is that what?
Yeah. So the plan is to mow the vines, the Rosa rugosa, and the poison ivy to remove that biomass on the surface. and be planting the grasses into the dune. These are species that are native to that environment. They're native to that amount of impact from waves, from water, from tide. You know, these species grow in that area. They know how to react and deal with the tides and the influx of flooding. So the idea is to remove the biomass on the surface and introduce these native species that are there for stability.
What is it? What's the matter with Rosa rugosa?
It's invasive. It's an invasive species. So it's not native to that area. It'll outcompete a lot of those natural dune grasses that we want to establish.
Where is it from, though?
I'm not sure the exact origin, but it
does help hold the dunes back, though.
It is also, you know, that's why we want to be planting in good native species that are low growing and grasses that'll, you know, be more favorable as well to the aesthetic of the area.
So is there, but I think the question is there a period of exposure between the mowing and planting and having this native species take hold, where we need to worry about that dune being taken away? I mean, how do you control that?
So for in the dune area, we can do the mowing up to, you know, before the planting. The planting will be done in March. It's the ideal time for the species we're introducing. So it would limit the exposure of the dune being bare. As far as, you know, in the Phragmites area, you know, we want to, like it was mentioned, we want to get the mowing done before nesting season. So that's why we suggest this time of year. The dune, we have a little bit of play as in terms of when to do the mowing in coordination with the planting, as opposed to you know, the herbicide work, which needs to be done at a specific time in the year. So we can coordinate it to have them done around the same time to limit that exposure.
And the Phragmites root system will be around quite tenaciously for quite a while to help hold that dune together until the grasses establish themselves.
That's correct.
Especially, but
yeah.
Can you answer the question about the clams?
The clamming, that shouldn't be an issue there. We are using aquatic DEP aquatic approved herbicides in the area. We're doing such low volume, low input that I don't see runoff being an issue. I just don't foresee the clamming being an issue into those.
I think that we need some absolute insurance of that. Absolute assurance of that.
You know, this is approved by, will be reviewed by DEP through their process, who are really the experts in this process, and they do have their list of approved herbicides and how much of that should be applied here.
We relied on DEP when we lost all the lobsters along Island Sound due to some sort of spraying and so forth years ago. And that's maybe that's a theory of some sort, but it's certainly a concern.
Thank you.
I think this is a
quick question.
Lord, you know, that area along Lord's Point and over in the area, it's a few areas that we have left for clamming here. I think should be looked at very, very carefully. It's very, very carefully. Not only is it's a mode of recreation for a lot of people around here, and certainly it's an environmental thing. So I think that's very important. Thank you.
One more question, if I could.
Yeah.
Stephen Dodd, I'd like to ask a question. So I'm president of the Point Association. We have a good rapport with Greg and Annette. Gary, I'm sorry, Annette, but the question I have is a follow-on. The dune is a real concern because there's a bunch of houses behind that are protected. So I understand protected by the action of that long dune. It's a barrier beach, really, but so DEP, I'm sure, is going to pay attention to this, and I know it's probably outside of the purview of P&Z, but you mentioned silt fence or something potentially. It gets a lot of heavy wave action. there in the winter in particular. And so I have the same concern about the stability of the dune during this period, those two sections down in the front of the 2 or 3 years of planting efforts. So you spoke to it a little bit, but I don't know whether there's a requirement that P&Z would even put on you anyway, because it's a DEP requirement. But do you anticipate, and can you provide us with some assurance that that dune is going to be protected in these particular big winter storms after that vegetation stripped, even though I know there'll be some roots remaining from the plants, but they'll be dying off, right? Because you're going to poison them and make sure they can't come back. It's a big concern. If it punches through there, there are about 9 house properties behind it, plus Lindbergh, which already floods with tidal flooding. So can you just speak to that a little more, maybe completely?
I can try to address that if you'd like. So obviously we want to try to protect our investment. We're putting a lot of money into this restoration and this dune. So certainly during the winter months where the wind and surf are rough, I would propose that we protect the dune grasses, either with a silt fence or a snow fence, so the sand is kept in its position and doesn't erode. That would be certainly something we would be look favorable upon, because I think we want to try to protect our investment. This isn't a cheap invasive removal. We're proposing to replant, which is $3,000 or $4,000 in planting. So we want to make sure that we do this once. So we would certainly want to protect that, and by putting up some barrier between the TOA slope that we're starting in the dune. Did that help answer your question? Or
Yeah, it does. Thank you, and I appreciated the other commentary around the Phragmites area, because that it is an effective place for the deflected waves to go off of Oak and down through that, and ultimately make its way to that pond and out the pipe. So happy to see that there's no changes planned there, other than to get rid of the Phragmites and put something in that makes more sense. No, thank you very much. I think that covers it.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone else? Do I hear a motion on this application?
A motion to approve the application?
Do I have a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Do we want to add the condition about the fencing along with the other conditions that Keith has?
We could do that, shouldn't we?
Yeah, erosion and sedimentation control measures shall be added to protect the dunes.
Good.
And state approval should be attained prior to any ground disturbance.
Right.
Good.
well, Mr. Chairman, are we allowed to mow? I thought we were allowed to mow without it. We could go in and mow tomorrow. We don't need a DEP permit to mow. We basically just need the DEP permit for the chemicals. So
Mowing does not constitute ground disturbance, does it?
No.
okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
Any other stipulations?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
4D4 is PZ 201 SD and GPP, Jane L. Howard, trustee, JT Marine. Request 90-day extension to file final plans for previously approved subdivision. Property located at 152 South Anguilla Road, Pawcatuck. Assessors map 37, block 1, lot 8, zones RR80 and GB 130. This was a subdivision that was approved by the commission back in October. Similar to the previous one on the agenda tonight, they're looking for an extra 90 days to file the final Mylars. And some of the legal documents were submitted today, so progress is being made on that.
Okay.
Make a
Motion to approve.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and under old business, we have item 6A, PZ 2025, Cam, Brian J. Stafford, Russell Sargent, coastal area management site plan review application to accompany future zoning permit application for the construction of a single-family residence property located at Rosalia Drive, Mystic, Assessors Map 175, Block 1, Lot 1, Zone RC 120. And I believe Mr. Sargent is here to present this for the commission.
Before we get there, Keith, why is this old business? I don't remember seeing it.
You know, it was considered accepted at a meeting that we canceled. So that would have been.
What?
What does that mean?
So the commission accepts new applications once a month, but sometimes we cancel that meeting like we did in January.
I see.
Oh,
we don't tell people, sorry, you can't submit your application. We still allow people to submit it. It starts the clock.
so it's only old in the sense that it's been submitted, but we haven't heard it before.
We haven't seen it.
Right.
It's been
Yeah.
opened.
I thought I was losing it. Okay.
Mr. Sargent?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is old in the sense that you've already reviewed this property for a series of zoning variances that the property received. It's a very small lot in a zone that it's in a 3-acre zone, and yet it's only 2,700 square feet. So basically what we're doing is following up on it, and it's a requirement that before we can apply for a zoning permit and then a building permit, we've got to go through the coastal site plan review process again. That's what we're doing right now. I don't know if you have the planning, the PZA meeting report in front of you, but I'm just going to go through this. This is at the intersection of Roosevelt when you go across the railroad tracks. The town right-of-way goes right to Mystic Harbor, and Rosalia goes out to the boatyards, and there are a number of houses on that street. It is a private street, as the staff review indicates, which means that we can't connect to the sewer line on that street. It's a forced main owned by the marina at the end. We'll get back to that. It's a very small site. As I said, there is public, water and sewer available. There's a manhole at basically at the end of Roosevelt, and that's what we're looking to connect to. This property is in a V zone, so the house will be built on right now we're looking at masonry piers. It'll be raised up, and all the utilities and all the structure below the base flood elevation and the design flood elevation will either be breakaway and will be flood sustaining. As I said, we received, and I'll pull up, I'm going to try the share feature here. I'll pull up the site plan in a minute to go through just specifically what we're doing. We received a number of setbacks from variances from a number of setbacks. I'll go through that then. We've had comments and a lot of discussion with a number of the town staff, Candy Palmer, Keith Brines, the new town engineer, Chris Greenlaw, I believe his name is. And he had a series of comments dated 1/28 a week ago. The first two of which have to do with the sewer. We know we're going to have to, install a sewer line connection with the pipes and the materials and the pitch and so on that meets town standards. The exact route of that, we're in discussion. The town engineer, Doug Nettleton of the Water Pollution Control Authority said, well, maybe they'll bring a stub off the manhole so that future development on Jerome Avenue to the east could happen. That seems highly unlikely. So we're working through that. He had a number of specific comments. One in my soil and erosion control notes. I sometimes don't write them new each time, and I mentioned that the roof drainage is going to go into an existing storm drainage system. That's not true. The site's going to remain as impervious, and any water will go into from a downspout will go into a splash pad and leak off. It's pretty porous soil as near as we can tell, and we're 3.5, 4 feet above mean high water, or mean sea level, excuse me. There was some comment about Phil and the town flood consultant, a guy named Dave Murphy, basically said, well, we can't use structural fill. We're not intending to do that. This will be a building where we intend not to drive piles. There's essentially, there's 3 ways to do a pier pile foundation of the zone. One is you drive the wooden piles. There are a number of houses on Rosalia where, in fact, one that's just been constructed where they've done that. The approach we'd like to do, because it appears to be more durable and it's easy to work with in terms of the breakaway panels we intend to use at the ground floor, is to do either a poured concrete or a masonry pier going down to a footing. And we have an engineer involved, structural engineer, to work with us on the soil conditions and how we can achieve that. And there's a third way, which is twist screws, screw piles, which you then have to either do wood posts on or concrete. We find that if we don't have to do that, we prefer not to. One of the things that's come up is a soil stockpile. Well, we're not digging a foundation. And if I can share, see if I can share a drawing here with you. Well, I can't. I thought I could. Keith, that's just shared.
I can try to put that up.
That is only just get the elevations. I mean, all I need are the architecturals. They're in the report, and I'm not real familiar with this system. Open system. Yeah. Huh. Well, I'll continue. I'm assuming you've all had an opportunity to at least have a copy of the material.
No, excuse me, Rusty, I didn't see any plans in our report. Keith, were they there?
Yeah, page.
I didn't see any.
I didn't.
On the PZ meeting report dated 2/2/21 on page 19. Let's see what it is here. Oh, they're not on that.
There was no elevation or site plan that I remember.
I have all that on my on my desktop. I'm trying to figure out share.
It was linked to the agenda. But the plans were linked to the agenda. But let me. I'm working on getting the plans up here.
I found that before. Sometimes it's in the agenda, but not your report, and vice versa. I didn't double check. I didn't double check the agenda. Okay.
Let's see.
So I haven't seen it, Rusty.
Share my screen here.
Maybe other commissioners have seen that, the elevations. I don't know.
I haven't seen it.
I don't, it's not, the links aren't in the agenda either.
Yeah, I'm not
There
seeing
we are.
those either. Yeah.
Okay, if you look.
That wasn't in the staff. What I'm seeing now was not in the staff report.
No, because we don't usually put we can't put the whole plans in the report. So what we do in these COVID times is have a link to the plans that are on the agenda. It looks like the staff report doesn't have that link, I see.
It's in the application, the 21-page application that has all the has the application, a survey, and then the drawings.
We haven't seen any of that.
Okay, let me Let me double check something here.
Well, we're seeing them right now. Thank you.
Does that show up now?
It was up a minute. It was up a minute ago.
It was up a minute ago, but now it's not.
Well, that's the craziest thing.
Yeah, the posted agenda does include the link to the plans, but somehow the staff report does not.
It says I'm sharing my window, but I don't.
We are looking at your screen, Rusty, with all our faces on it.
You got me.
It was posted a few minutes ago. It was the elevation.
Yeah, that was me. I put that up there.
Oh.
Put it back.
Oh, put it back up, please, Keith.
Yeah.
Can you put the site plan up?
That's
right.
you.
So
I don't understand why I can't. I'm hitting share and it won't let me put. I've done this before. Okay.
I think because we're both trying to share at the same time, and we're sort of.
Why don't you? Well, there's one thing I want to show you. In the upper left, you can see this is the street elevation of the house. And the next thing I was going to talk about is the town engineer was looking for a soil stockpile. You can see the building is on a series of piers right above where it says North You can see the building. There's a series of piers across the front, and the actual grade of the ground floor of the building is up. So we're not going to be doing that much digging. The soil stockpile is if you're going to be digging a full foundation and have to take that material out, much of which gets removed, and then it gets filled in back around, around the foundation hole. Here, I mean, we'd be willing if it appears that any amount of material had to be removed from the site for whatever reason, we could move it off site, and we'd be happy to allow that as a condition of approval. But as you can see on the north elevation, the existing grade varies from 3.5 to 3 to almost 4 at the street. And we're going to be raising the building up several feet from that to get it out of that flooded area. That's that end of Roosevelt Avenue does flood on a fairly frequent basis.
Yeah, I was down there today.
The final thing that came up from the town engineer's report was that we were supposed to note the proposed and grass areas or disturbed areas to be seeded. Keith, can you pull up the site plan?
Yeah, let me get that.
It's the next one down. Basically, that's perfect right there. There's a number of, I mentioned before, there are a number of setbacks we've received variances for. There's a wetland setback, a coastal jurisdiction setback, and what was the third one?
There was the V zone setback. Did you mention that one?
It's the road.
No, we're in.
Wait a minute. It's the road setback, the street.
The third one. That's right. Thanks, Brian. My clients are here, Brian Stafford and Gene. We got. I think it's a 15-foot road setback, and we had that reduced to 10. I think the critical things, if you look in the middle here, you see 3 colors. One sort of a magenta. That is the floor area of the house, which counts towards our FAR. The green is uncounted FAR, floor area that's not counted, which is stairways and elevators, and then the unroofed deck. Just outside of that, you can see 2 things that pretty much coincide, and that one is a red dashed line, which are essentially the zoning, coastal jurisdiction, and wetland setbacks. And you can see that the house and deck, you can see a little bit of, hashed line around all of that, indicating we're set that, we're further in than what the allowable variances, provided for. And those are essentially the comments from the engineer. There was one other one. If you look at the, I don't know if you're seeing this, up on the right-hand side above the house, the property line, we have the number 4 contour has been changed. We provided fill to get the driveway from the street up to the house, and it projects in beyond the property line. That will be amended to show that it's all grading and work is within the building property line. And then this is the double dark, the double lines with the gray inside of the silt fence. One of the questions was, can we show where the grass, where we're going to be regrazing, or providing new grass? Basically, the soil erosion control fencing will be put in, and nothing outside of that will be disturbed, and so we'll blend in from when the fence is removed and the house is finished and all the final grading is done. It'll just be, sod or grass seed will be provided to stabilize the site. As I mentioned, this is old business in the sense that DEP and you looked at this application in 2018 when the variance was applied for. And, basically it's a VE14 zone house. First floor elevation will be above, the bottom in a V zone, the bottom of the horizontal framing has to be at the base flood elevation. So Keith, if you can go back a page to the elevation. Yeah, up a little. Yeah, the north in the upper left there actually shows everything. If you look to the left, you see a term called BFE here. We're in a VE elevation 14 zone. Stonington has a requirement that you go 1 foot above that. That's the 1 foot of freeboard. So the first floor is at 17 feet. We're well within the overall height, and everything below that elevation 15 freeboard is all breakaway, except for the reinforced masonry piers, obviously. The DEP report that was submitted in 2018 goes through all this and describe the setbacks we received. It is a shellfish concentration area with the silt fencing, and leaving the area outside the silt fencing untouched. We don't predict there'd be any issues with any harm to any of the shellfish that are in the Mystic Harbor in that location. So I think I talked a little bit about the sewer line, and I think I've pretty much covered what Doug Nettleton said there. As we all know, there's a moratorium until June, and we don't probably not going to be finished by June, but hopefully at that point things will open up again. And in the meantime, once we get a zoning permit and start working for a building permit, we'll work with the Water Pollution Control Authority to achieve a sewer connection that they're satisfied with. The floodplain management consultant basically, I had a number of conversations with him. He was concerned about structural fill, which he now realizes we're not doing. And the only other concern he has, if you look just to the right of the elevation, you'll see there's an elevator from the garage level up through the house. He was just concerned on, the building official is going to have to look at that. We've done a number of V-zone elevator shafts. You can either do a concrete masonry pier, or you can do a heavily reinforced concrete shaft for the elevator. FEMA has regs on how to do that, and we'll follow that.
The mechanicals are rusty. Mechanicals are all above and top.
Yeah, basically what it is, if you Keith, can you go down to the I guess that'd be the west elevation? Yeah, in the lower right, that's a pretty good idea. Gives you a pretty good idea of the complexity of the house in a sense, and how high it is. I mean, the floor is 10 feet 10. It's actually about 13 feet above the street level. Basically, there's a deck out to the right at the first floor level, and you can see the elevator shaft sort of in the middle there, the lower portion of which is reinforced concrete. And the question on the mechanicals, it comes into play. We use a lot of these Mitsubishi split systems or electric heat pump systems to provide air conditioning. It's a very small house. It's essentially a 3-room house. There's a powder room and a living room and kitchen on the first floor, and a bathroom and a bedroom on the second floor with a walk-in closet where the washer and dryer is going to be located. All the plumbing is above the, above the first floor, so it's well clear of the base flood elevation. And electric panel board obviously will have to be there also. All the pipe, all the piped infrastructure, the sewer line and the water line coming in, have to be, mounted against one of the concrete columns or masonry columns. Water lines obviously have to be in an insulated chase, and assume we'll probably be doing underground electrical and other wire utilities. The stipulations that staff laid out that the final plans be reviewed by the town engineer based on those list of things I just went through. And just another couple of notes, once again, about the sewer line. And essentially, that's it. I try to be brief. I hope I haven't rushed through anything, but I'm more than open to questions.
Any questions at this time?
Mr. Chairman, I have a few questions. This is Chuck.
Yeah.
Thank you, Russ. That was a good explanation, and a lot of my questions were answered in the presentation about the structural engineer's engagement on the columns. But I have a few questions about the site. And the first one is, the house is at an extremely low elevation, and my concern is that even the slightest high tide could touch this house. And have you examined that and taken a look at mean high tides and perigee tides and what those elevations typically are in this area? Because I think you're very close to them.
Yeah, I've done another house. I did a house recently on Jerome. I don't know, 2 houses to the east from here. Mm-hmm. We had a number of conversations on that. We, in fact, were intending to build a new house, a V-zone house like this, but the cost became too great. And, the owner there was well, all my clients are clever people, but, he was a, particularly well-versed fellow on flood zone issues. He lives in Florida part of the year and here the other part. And, one of the things is people are taking a risk to live in these locations. I think what you've defined, and I think what we all know is, these places are going to become wetter and wetter. And I think, I try to explain that to my clients, and I think these clients actually know that. And the good thing is we have, pretty good storm warning systems in place. And areas like this, I assume, are evacuated. And if they're not evacuated, somebody shouldn't stay here. But even if, you do get a flood, a very high flood, very high water, the basic living portion of the house, everything below the flood elevation, that's breakaway walls and masonry piers, is meant to sustain whatever damage they can get, especially from slowly rising waters rather than the wave impact. If you have wave impact and you have breakaway walls, your walls are going to come down. I mean, I think, people, that's pretty obvious. But, the personal choice or the freedom of choice in a sense that people have to live here, I think is their decision to make. I did receive an email, which I don't know if it was included in the package, from the Coastal Resiliency Commission. I think a fellow by the name of Rick Newton, if I recall. And he was saying, well, you really got to look at this. And in the process we're in tonight, that's not what we're doing. We're just trying to conform with the regulations. As a planning and zoning commission, you have a right to look at these issues and say, hey, look, maybe we should start restricting or putting additional restrictions on. Not a big fan of that, but that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We're here specifically to talk about whether this conforms with the setbacks, the height, and all the flood zone regulations. And as I've mentioned, before, DEP has looked at this, and I think Keith will confirm that they don't necessarily look at it again. And we're doing exactly what they had approved in the 2018 zoning variance.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get my arms around the frequency with which the water rises to elevation 5, the first floor of this house, because, I think that's all great what you just talked about. And we always try to protect against a 100-year flood. But if the water rises to elevation 5 every week, this is not really a livable house. So I'm trying to get my arms around how frequently the water comes up to elevation 5, which is low. The water, I would think, probably fairly frequently comes up that high.
Well, when you say the first elevation of the house, the garage is at 6. And
Oh,
that's
excuse me. Okay, I couldn't read it on the posted
no problem.
site plan I had here.
Yeah, no problem. No, and this, I think the important thing to if you think more of in the A zone where the house, maybe similarly raised up, but all that area down below can be enclosed with flood vents to allow the water to come up and down, but it can't technically be habitable space. In other words, you can't have a oriental rug on the floor and fancy furniture and a TV down there. Technically, that might happen. I don't know. So the fact is, it's sort of like in the basement of your house. I mean, basements flood all over Stonington and Groton and North Stonington. It's maybe a bad analogy, but if you live in a place where there's a high groundwater table and you have a basement below grade, yeah, there's going to be water in that. That's how how the ground floor of this house is. There likely will be water in that at different times throughout the year. And I don't think there's any question that the water is going to be rising.
I'm just trying to get my arms around the frequency to which the water comes up to elevation, well, let's say even 6. But I'd actually feel better if there were no breakaway walls or anything under this house. That would alleviate some of my concerns. But I think the water is going to touch this house on a very frequent basis.
I can't say that's not possible. I don't disagree with you.
Well, it's certainly going to be the road's going to be flooded on a very frequent basis. It already is. So it's going to be a case of making sure you have enough food and whatnot in the house till the water goes down. I have another question about this site, and something in the write-up suggested that the entire site, with perhaps a few feet at the front of it, is in a non-infringement area. So we haven't talked about that, but how do we build a house here at all in a non-infringement area?
Well, it's an established site. I mean, I've worked on other house 2 houses away. The 100-foot infringement zone was 70 feet beyond their property line.
Okay.
So it's an established site the town's been collecting taxes on for all these years. Clients bought it with the expectation that they could do that I think they're legally allowed to do. So that 100-foot infringement zone, would make it so none of Rosalia Drive could be built on.
Correct.
Large portions of, Stonington Borough couldn't be, that's the borough and zoning. I realize that's different, but, waterfront locations throughout town, Lord's Point, Latimer Point, those areas, this is the problem when you have to write a regulation. You can't tailor it to specific local site conditions, or you could, but it's just too difficult for the regulators to do. So they just take, inland wetlands. You have a hard and fast 100-foot infringement zone.
Yes,
what
you
about,
do.
There's a 70-foot cliff between you and the wetlands. There's a whole series of things where you have to have a hard and fast number in order for a regulation to be valid. It may not be tailored to a specific site. That's why we have a variance process. And I don't know what my sense is from talking to an attorney recently that it was a unanimously granted variance. So there is a recognition of the hardship on the site. And it's really the purchaser and the property owner's risk as to how to deal with the fact there's water in the street here all the time, making sure they have enough groceries.
So that variance has already been granted?
Yeah, 2018. Or maybe 19.
Yeah, it was the beginning of 2019. It was granted for the non-infringement area. The town also has a rule that says if you're in a FEMA V zone, you can't build something or even substantially improve your structure if you're in 100 feet of the coast. So that applies to this property as well. And that was also varied by the ZBA, as well as the front setback, so they can move the house closer to the street. So basically, the ZBA sort of
Tied
looked at
our
these
hands.
issues. Yeah, in a way, they looked at these issues, and you know, even though the town does have these rules, the ZBA decided to vary the rules for the reasons that Mr. Sargent said. Basically, that they looked at it as an established building lot that the town had been taxing them on for decades.
I have a question.
Discussion.
We haven't seen this before. We haven't had anything to do with variances before. That was all
No.
ZBA, correct?
Right.
Okay, well, Rusty Sargent, sometimes we don't know what the ZBA is doing, unfortunately. So this is new to me, that all these setbacks were permitted.
Well, and as I look at it, I do a lot of complicated sites. This is a very, very, very complicated site in terms of the number of crisscrossing regulations. But the engineer who got the variances, worked it out very carefully and made the plausible case to the ZBA that a house could be built here and would not be an issue with any of the environment, wouldn't create environmental issues, which the DEEP agreed with. And as I say, this time around, I don't even think they looked at it, but we're basically following the rule book that they sent out in their previous approval of the ZBA decision.
So we don't have much to say about it, I guess.
No, I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, to me, in a sense, to go through two of these processes seems to be a little bit redundant, but that's the way the system's set up.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? Ben
Yeah.
Telsky. Quick question.
Go ahead.
I'm not really familiar with the record of the ZBA, but I think that I was there at the meeting. I thought that some representations were made as to the availability of sewer. And I hope that maybe staff has the record on that, because I'm not sure that it's the same as what's being presented tonight. Thank you.
I'm unclear as to the issue as far as whether the ZBA knew that sewer was available.
That's correct. That's correct. I'm interested in what representation was made to the ZBA when they granted the variances as to the availability of sewer. I thought that they were proposing to tie into the private sewer line on Rosalia Drive. Now we're being told that's not the case. So I just think that the record should be checked on that.
Keith, can you take this down? I have the letter. I can read the letter from the, I've had a number of conversations with the, that's right. No, leave it up. I got it right here. Just waiting for my other computer.
Well, it was approved back, this is Brian Stafford talking, and it was approved back in the 2018 when we got it approved as a direct hookup on to the manhole that's on the end of Broadway extension. That's where it was shown. It was never shown to be hooked to the private line on Rosalia Drive.
If that's what the record of the ZBA shows, I'm fine with that. It's just not what I remember. I just want to make sure that they're getting the proper information.
Basically, the Doug Nettleton with the Water Pollution Control Authority, who we've spoken to a number of times, basically on the screen in front of you, he was saying at this point, the SMH in the sort of top center of the page is the sewer manhole at the end of Roosevelt Avenue extension, Broadway extension, excuse me. And he wanted us to bring a stub out to the end of the pavement and run the sewer line at that location. Since then, he's, based on comment, I think, from Keith and a conversation they had, there are wetlands in that particular area where it says sewer and sort of Ys. And so at this point, the discussions we've had with him are that it would go from the upper right corner of the house directly out to the manhole.
Is that town property?
Well, there's no property line at the end of the road, at the sort of line between Rosalia and Jerome. So my guess is yes. It doesn't show up on the it doesn't have a property designation on the town GIS. So
Yeah, that's what it seems like. It's the
Yeah.
the end of Broadway Ave extension.
Any other questions at this time? Do I hear a motion on this application?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Well, for purposes of discussion, I'll second the motion.
Discussion?
A question that I'm still kind of puzzled as to what it is we are approving here, given that ZBA seems to have stolen a march on us, and that there doesn't seem to be much we can do with this application. What exactly are we approving?
It is a pretty redundant process because the ZBA approved the variances, and as part of that, they're required to approve the coastal area management application themselves, where they look at these issues and refer the plans to DEP. Our regulations and state statutes also say that there needs to be the step where it comes before the PZC for a CAM application, even though they were already granted a CAM application along with the variance. So basically it's, does it comply with zoning in lieu of the variances that gave them some relief on that? And does it meet the coastal area management statutes?
So is the fact that it's a dumb process, does the fact that it's a dumb process warrant a no vote?
Well,
no, I'm just
unfortunately,
kidding.
no.
I'm just kidding.
And we tried to clarify this with DEP when this happens. Do people need to come back to PZC for a second CAM application? And their take was, yes, it's still required, but that we don't need to send the plans to DEP for a second round of DEP comments, which is why the comments in the staff report from DEP are the original ones from a year or two ago with the variance.
Keith, am I allowed to talk during the discussion, or I'm shut off this point?
No, you're shut off. We can talk. You can talk.
Yeah, it's not a public hearing, so.
I have a similar thing that you're going to see that is a variance that was granted on a commercial property. And I can understand possibly in a commercial property where at the variance stage, you may not have the plans fully worked out. Here, there are not that many options as to what's going to go on this site. But in this other one, it's a commercial site. We got a front yard setback. We had to go to get a coastal site plan review through DEEP. And now we're going to come back and go with that front yard setback, which isn't as controversial as the number of setbacks we've seen here, that, yeah, we haven't done anything too different or impinged upon any other setbacks or any other actions we've taken would impact the coastal resources. So I think Keith used the word and I'd use the word, it's sort of redundant. It's just another layer of beating up on applicants. I'm not saying you're beating up, but I'm saying it doesn't, if it's a foregone conclusion, I don't know.
Any other discussion?
No, just to note in any motion that there are 4 recommended stipulations in the report on page 20.
Would you mind reading those, Keith?
Oh, sure.
I don't
It's
have that in front of me.
Number 1 is the final plan shall be reviewed to the satisfaction of the town engineer regarding his January 28th comments. Number 2, the final plan shall note the property is in the RC 120 zone, but subject to the RH 10 bulk requirements. And that's because of our undersized lot provision in zoning. Number 3, the sewer connection shall be located out of the tidal wetlands, subject to WPCA review. And number 4, construction is subject to the WPCA's moratorium on increasing flows to the Mystic plant.
Thank you. And I think the hookup can be outside the wetlands, Rusty?
Yes. If you look at the plan that's on the screen right now, you can see there's to the left in green, there's a 13-foot wetland setback. And it goes right through where if you follow it all the way around to where the dock is and all the way up around to the other side where I had the sewer line.
Ah, yes.
That's an encroachment from where the green line is over to where it says sewer. So we'll probably bring it from the middle of the house, to the pier that's sort of on one side of the garage, right where the 10-foot dimension is from this front setback.
Yeah.
Bring it, straight from that's where the toilets are all lined up there, so it works out pretty cleanly to go right from that location over to the manhole. Or if he requires a stub, it would be a very short stub. I'm not sure how full that manhole is. Typically, you can only perforate a manhole so many times with penetrations, especially because of the elevation requirements to keep flow.
Any other questions under discussion? All those in favor of the motion?
I'll say aye.
Reluctantly, I will too.
Yeah,
Aye.
Aye, ayes have it. Motion, application approved.
Thank you for your time.
Let's take a 5-minute break, Commission. Is it all right?
Yeah, is there more?
A quick question. Are we going item by item, or are we going to do it all at once? All these
discussion. It's going to be a discussion more than item by item.
Okay. 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Take a break.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Hey, can I say something about this? Because I've seen some things in other regulations where other towns have stipulated in the regulations that there were certain planning and zoning commissions have stated in the regulations that there were certain provisions of the zoning regulations that could not be varied, like floodplain regulations and some of the things that were granted variances here. And I've seen that done in a number of other towns where you cannot obtain variances to certain portions of the regulations. And that may be a good thing if, to prevent just what we did right here. Well, no sense talking about it, but I mean, that house is going to be a problem. No question about it.
Oh, I went down there today. It's underwater, the whole lot. But
it is. And the water is going to touch that even in the slightest event that affects the tides. That house is going to be inundated.
And that's true of all of Rosalie Drive and other areas in town where, 100 years ago, somebody said they're 50-foot wide building lots. And so we're stuck with allowing construction in a where it makes no sense.
We're stuck with what's there, but we ought to know better than to create the new situations today.
Keith, can you look into that with Tom, how we can put it in?
Yeah, I mean,
variance?
What Chuck's mentions about prohibiting a certain class of variance, it's what our regulations do with use variances, because at some point in the 1980s, the town decided that we should not be granting use variances, and those are prohibited altogether. I would have to, I'd be concerned of the legality of not allowing a certain type of dimensional variance, just because the state statutes do allow for variances. So for the town to say we don't allow variances on height or flood issues.
Someone's mic's loose.
Yeah, I think Lynn has a lot of background noise when not muted. I'd be very concerned about the legality of that, but maybe there is something different about flood hazard regs, but it would seem to be the same issue.
Well, if you could do it for inland wetlands and stipulate so many feet away.
They have you can't build necessarily in the wetlands, and they have 100-foot review area.
Right.
But that's different than the non-infringement zone. I only know that because I live in a wetland setback. Okay.
Your mic is doing something.
Of variances that are given for non-infringement zones having to do with flooding affect the whole town's insurance rating? Like it just seems to me that there should be some type of stricter regulation just based on that.
The town got into trouble with flood insurance, and they were put on some sort of probation by FEMA for lax enforcement of the floodplain regulations. I can't imagine what they're going to do when they see this. I mean, to anybody that's done this kind of work, and I know we're all familiar with it, but I've done a lot of it. This kind of thing waters your eyes. It just, I mean, I've been a city engineer in a town that was flooded. We had to close the dikes, and we had a 100-year storm, and people died. There's serious events, and I see something like this with an elevator for a handicapped person, and I say, "Oh my God, this is like the perfect storm." I'm in disbelief, but I think floodplain zones may fall into the category of things that you can prohibit variances to, for just the reason that Lynn says is it deals with life and limb. But I don't know that for a fact. I'm going to do some research, and I'll supply it to Keith, because
Yeah,
it's
it'd
been
be
a
interesting
while.
to see.
That's a main question for Mr. Polland, who's going to be rewriting the regs, hopefully, in the next year or two. I would think that'd be a direct question for him.
Also a question for the town attorney
And the attorney.
as to how much latitude we have,
right,
given the state regulations,
right,
and federal probably in this case.
So I can tell you, I was the town engineer in a town that did it, and it stopped the nonsense with the ZBA. So,
in Connecticut?
Yeah, it did. Now that was a number of years ago, and we're much more concerned today about the issues that Keith raised, which are very real, and I don't mean to trivialize them. They're very real issues, the legality of it, and it would be a clear-cut way. If you can't do it, then they can't do it. So if it can be prohibited in the floodplain zone, that would have stopped this application.
And something to note with this is that the ZBA did not vary any FEMA floodplain requirements. The house was still built to FEMA V-zone standards. What they did vary was the town's own requirement that the house be 100 feet from the coast. And that's only a town rule. So that it wouldn't affect the community rating system or anything like that the town is in, especially because it wasn't a variance of an actual FEMA requirement.
Okay.
They built the house lower to the ground.
Keith, if we were the first ones to look at this, that question that I asked about how frequently would this house have been inundated, if that question had been answered and we knew the answer to it, and I suspect what the answer is, I'm not going to speculate because I don't know, but I suspect it's very frequently, everybody on this board would have turned that application down on that basis. Everybody would have turned it down. You're not going to build a house that those walls are frangible on the first floor, but it's going to do massive damage to that structure every time it floods. Massive damage to those walls.
And the question that has always occurred to me when I hear about breakaway walls is, what about the neighbors? all this stuff has to go somewhere, and it's going to come into the neighbor's house.
I hope they have a parking space up the street somewhere. The cars
doesn't saves the car. Yeah. Anyway, I think we have a lot to talk about.
Anyway,
moving right along.
We got all these questions from Keith. I'll update you on a few things. It looks like that there's a good chance that we're going to get funding through the Board of Finance for a complete rewrite of our regs.
Great.
It's the first selectman's all for it. I've spoken on a number of times one time at a meeting of department heads and people. We're having another one before end of this month. When's that, Keith? I don't know exactly. Anyway,
I'm not sure of the date, but it's one of the Board of Finance
it's
budget
top
meetings
of
coming
our
up.
list. It says we're impossible. We have to deal with. We don't know what we're dealing with half the time because of the regulations. And Jason had asked for it for years. They were going to fund it, and they weren't going to fund it. And then now it seems that Lynn Young, who's on the Board of Finance, is very much for it, I think. Danielle and June have both been on the Board of Finance, and they're advocates for it. So I think we're going to be able to get it on the current budget. But in the meantime, we've got to update in our regulations beforehand. And we've got a list here from Keith. It's a long list. We got to prioritize it. Now, I think maybe we should just have a meeting, a special meeting that we'll just discuss this. It'd probably be the best, rather than. Anyone else have any ideas of how we should do it?
I would agree with that, and maybe maybe with some guidance from either you, David, or Keith as to what we think the priorities ought to be. So we're not just open-ended.
I think Keith has, he's put things easy and moderate, but that's how we do it. But
okay,
how do we prioritize it?
Can we have a workshop, Mr. Chairman?
That's what I want to have.
Yeah, like a workshop.
Yeah.
Right.
I would agree with that. That would be good.
We basically next meeting we don't have much, do we, Keith?
I don't think so. I don't think so far we have anything.
No. So let's not schedule anything, just have a workshop next meeting. Is that agreeable to everyone?
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Yes.
I was in Keith's office today. Hey, Keith, tell him what came on your desk now, what we got to deal with.
A new application?
The new application is coming in. It hasn't come in yet.
Well, we received a pre-application materials for a phase 2 to the Brookside development. So it's an 830G application, 130 units of mixed income housing and 2 buildings in front of the Brookside development near the police station in Pawcatuck. So Monday night, the ADRB will look at this for the first time, just as a pre-application discussion. But it's a potentially significant development, could be coming your way over the next few months.
Okay.
4 stories high.
Is that open lot there right next to Route 1?
Yeah.
Just east of the station?
Yeah.
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 The grass area in front of Brookside housing.
Oh, that'll be fun.
Let me just ask, if it's 4 stories, is the only reason it can be 4 stories because we changed the height regulations, or could it be 4 stories no matter what?
No matter what, because of affordable housing.
Oh.
Yeah, so zoning wouldn't normally allow it that high there.
Okay. So they could make it 10 stories if that's what they wanted to do.
I don't know. Can they?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because in 830G, if you can prove that there's a safety issue, and if the fire department couldn't support, a response, that might be an issue that the attorneys would look at and say would be reason for denial at 10 stories.
Yeah.
But at 4, we don't have much say.
No, I agree.
Right. Unless something comes up during the whole review process, but that all remains to be seen.
This is the property that's across from the old seat there that we're talking about.
It's
I'm sorry,
crossing
I
the
couldn't.
VFW.
I'm sorry?
Crossing VFW.
Okay, yeah. That's the old Bessie, yeah. Okay, got it.
Okay. So our next meeting will be a workshop.
It's too bad that Parker's getting all the affordable housing. They're putting an awful lot of units in it.
Yeah, they've got the services, which was the key to that. If you remember our discussion about the downtown development, was that's the place that has sewer and
Water and
water.
sewer. Yeah.
How about the borough? Doesn't it have water and sewer?
It does.
They don't need land.
They don't have much land, though.
Well, well, I know.
And cost is a factor where, land, if there is land there, it is more expensive to make it more difficult.
Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll have this on the next agenda, and just look through the the possible amendments. These are things that are either mentioned in the POCD or have been mentioned by this commission or other boards and commission as possible things to look at. So, like Dave mentioned, the idea is that, if we're not going to have this massive comprehensive zoning rewrite, what should the commission focus on over the next year or so? So it really could only be a couple of them, because that's what we'd have the capacity to write up.
Okay. Will you, in the meantime, also look a little further into the question about the question that we were going to refer to the town attorney?
Prohibitive variances?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what how much latitude, if any, we have on that score?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially with the flood hazard issues.
Exactly.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everybody.
Been fun.
Good night.
Aye.
Good night, Gail.